guys, it's Zach back with another review, this time of the DrunkDeer X60HE, full aluminum case, only $100, high performance, 64 key, 60% layout, Hall effect keyboard. This is the first keyboard that I have tested from DrunkDeer, and I will say overall I am quite impressed with almost all aspects of the board. There is one thing that's not my personal preference, one thing I think that could be improved, and the rest of it is pretty much spot on. So with that, let's dive through a few of the specs. It has 8K polling down to 0.01 rapid trigger accuracy. As you can see here, a unique switch structure with a stem here separate from the top piece on their own self-developed Qian switch, which we'll talk about here in a bit. Your standard features like rapid trigger, SOCD, DKS, etc., etc. And a quick peek at their Qian magnetic switch, actuation force 35 plus or minus 10 GF. It'll travel a little bit longer at 4 millimeters. And again, that unique construction advertised here and to suppress the vibration of the magnet and enhance performance and stability. So as far as the build of the board, again, full aluminum case here, a little bit tall on the profile, but nothing crazy. I didn't find any discomfort in that. The back of the case is very cool. This whole aluminum cutout design, these pieces here being plastic and some rubber feet, not adjustable, not really a problem. Given it's aluminum, there's going to be no flex on this board. It felt very premium all around. Again, for $100, this feels like more than I expected to get at that price point. Again, a 60% layout with 64 keys. Cool things include having the delete key and the 4 arrows, a very unique placement for the delete key in the bottom right corner. This does bring up one of my main complaints about the board though. This tiny shift key drove me absolutely insane. I always hit the right shift to hit capital letters when I'm typing, and I always hit the middle of it, so I was pressing the up arrow all the time. I couldn't really adjust to that, so it did throw me off, but I also respect the grind in trying to get all of these keys into this very, very small footprint for what it's worth. And then aesthetically, I just find this board to be very sleek. It, again, feels very premium. I do like this back cutout design, a sort of unique thing that I've not had on a keyboard before. Sort of this gunmetal gray case complements these soon to be discussed transparent PC keycaps with the green text on them. Bit gamery here on these sort of symbols on the design of these like modifier keys here at the bottom, but of course that'll be up to your personal taste. Let's take a look at the keycaps and the switches. Again, transparent PC keycaps here. Centerpiece that attaches to the stem of the switches, extremely visible, which is an aesthetic you'll either love or hate. It's a little bit of a frosted feeling as stated. I personally am not a huge fan of these kinds of keycaps. I do like them a little bit more when they're like glossy for what it's worth. A lot of people find those slippery, don't love the feel. This is sort of an in-between. Again, didn't feel cheap by any means, but definitely a choice and something I might look to replace. But I'm also on a custom keycap kick lately, so I wouldn't really take my word for that. And then there's self-developed Qian switch here. I'll say off the bat, very aesthetically pleasing with the darker blue clear top case and that very wide rectangular with a center circle stem there. That provides for very high stability at every point of the movement of the switch. I will say the default sound on these to my ear a little bit poppy, not the loudest switches by any means, which I am always a fan of. I don't love the louder, clackier sounds, especially in these HE switches, more for a deep thock, something creamy. And then taking a look at the spacebar, honestly my biggest objective complaint about the board. This is one of the louder spacepars that I've heard recently, which I assume if you just drop another spacebar in here from a random other keyboard, it probably gets a lot quieter, and that is the case. It's not quite as rattly, not quite as loud. That sort of pinginess comes from the nature of the keycaps themselves. I had no additional top level suppression of the sound here. I did find all stabilizers on this keyboard to be very nicely lubed, including the spacebar here. Switches operation a very smooth one, but again, just a very loud spacebar experience, pingy by default and still kind of loud even when swapping to another spacebar. But now I've talked about it, let's hit that sound test. So as I said, a majority of the sound and feel of this keyboard extremely premium. Typing on it, using it in game feels very snappy, absolutely zero give here when you press in on the keys. Not a soft experience, almost a slightly harsher experience than normal, I would say, but one that I found to be generally very enjoyable. We will go ahead now and take a look at the lighting on the board. And as you can see with those transparent PC caps, the RGB is actually quite spectacular. If you like a light show, this can be the board for you. South facing RGB. The one thing that I will note is, as it's shown here, the light does sort of come through mostly the bottom of the keycap, and that part of the switch housing does show very thoroughly, so it is a very distinct look where the lights are definitely concentrated, but again, almost gives off the feel of like a police car siren going off, which is unique and definitely pops. Go ahead and take a look at the WebDriver. WebDriver itself is pretty snappy. I'm not overly picky on the very deep level functions of a WebDriver. As far as the performance goes, the tab that I'm usually most worried about, easy select all keys, and also select individual or deselect as well, or just your WASD. Minimum actuation value here is 0.1 millimeters. Rapid trigger down to 0.01 millimeters with continuous rapid trigger as an option. And then of course you can set the dead zones to 0. Not sure why it has it at 1.22 right now for my actuation on all switches. I typically run 1.2, and then we'll have the WASD all the way down at the minimum. All of the features around the minimum actuation on these keys felt very snappy, but not overly sensitive, but it does respond the exact fraction of a second you would expect it to. Very responsive in game. RGB effect, you'll see here in a bit, I actually didn't even have the maximum brightness turned all the way up, but I do have the speed all the way down, and it does still move pretty quickly at that speed, just a note. Of course, you can set macros here should you want to. We'll not dive too deeply into that, as it's not something that I personally ever do or care about. You can lock certain keys, use their adaptive stable algorithm. It didn't mess with the tick rate, left low shake resistance on, still did not see any accidental actuations, and ran at 8K pulling for all of my testing. Then of course, advanced keys. The only one that I typically use, SOCD, which I had on A and D, function exactly as I would want it to. Gives you the 4 different options here for how you would implement that. And then of course you can set the trigger as low as you want. I usually go 0.1 or the lowest setting. And then of course you have stuff like mod tap, which I only ever used on 60% keyboards so I can get my arrow keys back, because that drives me insane. So coming back to the board itself, again, you can see the RGB here popping even more on max brightness. It is actually very impressive. I see why they went for the transparent keycaps here, but what are my overall impressions of the DrunkDeer X60HE? It is a very premium feeling product. For $100, I think you are 100% getting your money's worth with this awesome aluminum build. To my feel, very well implemented custom Qian switches. The sound outside of that spacebar, very refined. Again, unless you're someone like me who is going to be bothered by this tiny right shift, you use the left shift, not a problem. The layout is also pretty cool. 64 keys, including arrows and delete, and the performance was on point. No problem for me recommending this very highly. Very impressed. I've followed DrunkDeer for a while, had never tested their keyboards before. I think they are continuing to improve as a company, and definitely looking forward to what they have coming next. Please subscribe and like if you've enjoyed the video. You can follow me on X at DasherZach. Check out the Mousecast podcast, as well as my peripheral Discord server. And with that, we'll see you.